For 20 years, her world was the steam of an iron and the silence of service. Her son's world became the glass towers of high finance. This is how the woman who spent her life pressing other people's suits watched her son acquire the company that owned them. Her name was Sophia Mendez. For 2 decades, she ironed shirts in the basement of the powerful Thornton estate, her labor funding a secret account. Every crease she smoothed paid for her son Mateo's tuition at the finest schools, molding him into the perfect corporate weapon. But this is not just a story of sacrifice. It is the story of a long, silent calculation. What happens when the student finally decides to test the master? Sophia arrived in the city with a single suitcase and a 7th-grade education, a migrant widow fleeing a town with no future. The Thornton estate, a Gilded Age mansion of stone and ivy, was the only place that would hire her. Her domain was the basement laundry, a windowless room of perpetual heat and hissing steam. Her employer was Charles Thornton II, a titan of old money whose family built Thornton Global, a conglomerate with interests in shipping, textiles, and real estate. To the Thorntons, Sophia was part of the household machinery, silent and efficient. They never saw the notebook she kept hidden in her apron pocket. In it, she recorded 2 numbers every Friday. The first was her weekly wage. The second was the portion she would never spend, deposited into a savings account at a bank 3 bus rides away. This was the genesis of the secret fund. Her son Mateo was 8 years old when she started at the estate. While she worked, he was cared for by a network of other working mothers in their modest apartment building. Sophia's plan was simple, brutal, and required 2 decades of flawless execution. Her labor would purchase his access. Every starched collar, every pressed linen, every silk blouse handled with care was a brick in a road leading away from that steamy basement. She enrolled him in a respectable public school, but she was studying a different directory. She saved for the application fees, the uniforms, the tutors. When Mateo was 13, she presented him with an acceptance letter to the prestigious Winchester Academy, a day school whose alumni ran the very world the Thorntons inhabited. The tuition was more than her annual salary. She paid it by taking on extra mending for the entire staff, working until 2 in the morning, her hands cramping around a needle. At Winchester, Mateo was an outsider among the sons of heirs and celebrities. He wore second-hand blazers and used textbooks, but he possessed a ferocious, quiet intelligence. He learned to code the school's computers, solve advanced equations, and debate economic policy. He also learned to observe. He saw how the wealthy sons carried themselves, their casual assumptions of power, their language of legacy and leverage. He became a ghost in their world, absorbing its rules without being consumed by its arrogance. At home, his mother asked only about his grades. She never spoke of her day, of the petty humiliations, of Mrs. Thornton complaining a sleeve was not crisp enough. The only evidence of her strain was the slow silvering of her hair and the deep quiet that settled in her bones each night. Their lives were a study in parallel isolation. He in a world of theoretical power, she in a world of tangible service. The connection was the monthly bank statement, the number growing, a silent testament to her will. The Thorntons, meanwhile, were facing a new world. Charles Thornton II was a traditionalist, but his son, Charles III, known as Tripp, was a different beast. Educated at the same schools Mateo now attended, Tripp was less interested in stewardship than in spectacle. He leveraged the family company to fund a lavish, public lifestyle, making Thornton Global a symbol of opulent excess. The business papers began to whisper about mismanagement, about debt piling up to finance yacht parties and dubious acquisitions. In the basement, Sophia heard the frustrated shouts from upstairs, the slamming of doors after meetings with worried accountants. The foundation of the empire was cracking, but the family's pride, their most dangerous asset, remained intact. They would never show weakness, especially not to the help. Mateo graduated at the top of his class, his acceptance to an elite university a foregone conclusion. The night before he left, Sophia placed a new ledger before him. It contained 20 years of deposits, withdrawals for tuition, and a final, staggering total. "This is not a gift," she told him, her voice rough from a lifetime of silence. "This is a weapon. You must learn to wield it." He understood. Her sacrifice was the capital. His education was the forge. His ambition would have to be the fire. At university, he doubled his focus, majoring in finance and computer science. He interned at hedge funds, not as a privileged scion, but as an analyst who could dissect a balance sheet and write the algorithms to trade it. He saw the future was in data, in the invisible pipelines of information that old conglomerates like Thornton Global did not even know they were leaking. Upon graduation, the headhunters came calling. Matteo had his pick of Silicon Valley or Wall Street. He made one inquiry to a person who owed his mother a favor from a long-ago kindness. A week later, he had an interview at Thornton Global's corporate headquarters. Trip Thornton, now CEO after his father's retirement, conducted the interview himself. He saw a sharp, hungry young man from a good school, a self-made striver. He did not see the ghost of the woman who ironed his shirts. He saw a tool. Matteo was hired as a junior analyst in the strategic investments division. The irony was perfect and utterly lost on the man who signed his offer letter. Sophia received the news in her basement room. She did not smile. She simply nodded, and that evening, she ironed Trip Thornton's dinner jacket with a precision that bordered on the ceremonial. For 3 years, Matteo was the ideal corporate soldier. He worked punishing hours, delivered insights that saved the company millions, and slowly, carefully mapped its entire financial architecture. He saw the rot firsthand, the vanity projects, the bloated contracts, the shell companies used to hide losses. He also saw the one remaining gem, the original textile arm, a profitable, unglamorous business that the Thorntons considered outdated, but which had steady cash flow. He began modeling scenarios in secret, on his own time. A takeover was not just a fantasy, it was a mathematical probability if only someone could assemble the pieces. The final piece arrived in a moment of carelessness. Trip, frustrated with his old guard board, ranted in a closed-door meeting about a hostile reset he was planning, a move to consolidate power by taking the company private. He didn't know the audio from the boardroom was piped to a server Matteo had accessed months prior, a digital backdoor left open by negligent IT. Matteo heard the plan, and more importantly, he heard the fear in Trip's voice. The empire was not just cracked, it was teetering, and the heir was preparing a desperate, selfish gamble to save his own skin. Matteo drove to his mother's apartment that night. He laid it out for her not as a son, but as a strategist presenting a campaign. The numbers, the vulnerabilities, the moment of maximum weakness that was coming. Sophia listened, her hands folded in her lap, still reddened from the day's work. She asked only one question. "Can you win?" He said it would require everything. Her life savings, his career, their anonymity. She went to her bedroom and returned with the original passbook, the one from the bank 3 bus rides away. She placed it on the table between them. The silence in the room was deafening, filled with the echo of 2 decades of steam and sacrifice. The student was ready, but the master, watching from his penthouse, was already making a move that would change the rules of the game entirely. Unbeknownst to either of them, Trip Thornton had just initiated a secret audit, searching for the leak in his company, and his suspicious gaze was falling, for the first time, on his most promising young analyst. The audit was a silent tremor through Thornton Global's headquarters, a sweep conducted by an outside firm with a reputation for digital dissection. Matteo felt its presence not in memos, but in the changed rhythm of the building. Security badges were rescanned at odd hours. Server access logs, once an afterthought, were now pulled daily. A colleague in IT, a man who owed Matteo a favor from a late-night system crash, slid into his cubicle. "They're looking for ghosts in the machine," he whispered. "Specifically, any backdoors into the executive suite. Trip thinks he's got a rat." Matteo thanked him with a nod, his face a mask of calm concern. Inside, every instinct screamed to purge his personal drives, to delete the models and the boardroom audio file. That would be the first mistake. Instead, he did the opposite. He scheduled a meeting with Trip's chief of staff, requesting an opportunity to present a new cybersecurity initiative for the textile division. He positioned himself not as a suspect, but as the solution. While Matteo navigated the corporate maze, Sophia faced a more intimate threat. Mrs. Amelia Thornton, Trip's mother and the lady of the house, decided it was time to refresh the staff quarters. This meant inspections. Sophia's small room, adjacent to the laundry, was a temple of minimalism. But in a worn hatbox on the top shelf of her closet, wrapped in tissue paper, lay every report card, every dean's list letter, and every graduation program from Matteo's academic career. It was the physical archive of her conspiracy. The inspection was set for Friday morning. On Thursday night, Sofia, after 14 hours of work, took 2 buses across the city to Matteo's modest apartment. She handed him the hatbox without a word. He understood. The past had to be hidden from the house that paid for it. Back at headquarters, Matteo's cybersecurity presentation was a calculated masterpiece. He identified the very backdoor he used as a critical vulnerability, proposing a low-cost fix that would make him look like a hero. Tripp, impressed by the initiative, approved it on the spot. The audit, distracted by this new official project, moved on to other departments. Matteo had not just avoided the trap, he had used it to tighten his grip on the company's digital nervous system. But the victory was short-lived. A new crisis erupted. A major shipping contract, the lifeblood of Thornton Global's logistics arm, was abruptly cancelled. The client, a European retail giant, cited instability in leadership. The stock price, already fragile, began a precipitous slide. Tripp's response was not strategic, it was theatrical. He announced a lavish investor gala at the estate itself, a desperate display of opulence meant to project unshakable strength. He ordered the entire staff, including domestic, to be on hand. Sofia would be serving champagne in the very rooms she normally cleaned. The gala was a surreal collision of worlds. Under crystal chandeliers, Matteo moved among bankers and brokers, the sharp young analyst from the textiles division. Across the marbled floor, Sofia circulated with a silver tray, her eyes downcast, her uniform impeccable. From his vantage point, Matteo watched the powerful interact. He saw the forced smiles of the board members, the nervous glances of the investors. He saw Tripp laughing too loudly, clutching a glass of whiskey, the fear in his eyes poorly concealed by bravado. It was during a toast, a hollow speech about Thornton legacy, that Matteo saw his mother's gaze lift and lock with Tripp's. It was for less than a second, a flicker of recognition, no, something colder, a silent assessment like a mechanic looking at a failing engine. Tripp, sensing the stare, glanced over, saw a servant, and dismissed her with a slight, unconscious frown. In that moment, Matteo realized the true weapon wasn't just data or money. It was the profound, intimate knowledge of the enemy's weakness, knowledge his mother possessed in her bones. The night provided a critical piece of intelligence. Drunk and seeking an ally, Tripp's younger brother, Carter, cornered Matteo on a terrace. Carter was the artistic Thornton, excluded from the business but privy to its gossip. "He's bleeding out," Carter slurred, gesturing back to the party. "The going private scheme, it's not to save the company, it's to liquidate it. He's got a buyer lined up for the textile mills in Asia. Wants to cash the last valuable chip and disappear before the walls cave in." This was the pivot. Tripp wasn't trying to save Thornton Global, he was planning to cannibalize it. The profitable textile division, the very division Matteo was studying as the company's core, was already sold in Tripp's mind. Matteo's plan for a careful, strategic takeover was now obsolete. He was in a race against a fire sale. The following Monday, Matteo activated his network. Using encrypted channels, he reached out to 3 university classmates now in powerful positions: a legal prodigy at a mergers and acquisitions firm, a quantitative analyst at a major pension fund, and a financial journalist with a nose for scandal. He presented a compelling, anonymous narrative. A historic American company was being secretly stripped by its own heir, costing jobs and pensions. He provided just enough verifiable data, the cancelled contract, the stock manipulation patterns, to spark their professional curiosity. He was not yet making a move, he was preparing the battlefield. Meanwhile, Sofia performed her own reconnaissance. As she cleaned the private study after the gala, she noted the torn-up note in the wastebasket. Pieced together, it was a frantic reminder to a lawyer: accelerate divestiture docs, silence the textile union reps, bonus for speed. She committed the lawyer's name to memory and relayed it to Matteo that evening through a prearranged, untraceable method. A comment on a specific, obscure cooking blog they both followed. Armed with the lawyer's name, Matteo's legal contact dug deeper. She discovered the lawyer was a specialist in offshore asset transfers. The trail, though murky, pointed to a shell company in the Cayman Islands that had been buying up Thornton Global's distressed debt at a rapid pace. It was a classic hedge fund tactic: weaken a company, buy its debt cheaply, and then force a restructuring to seize control. But the timing was too perfect, too synchronized with Tripp's actions. The horrifying realization dawned. Tripp wasn't just selling to a random buyer. He was likely in cahoots with this hedge fund, orchestrating the company's downfall from the inside for a personal payout. This was financial treason. Matteo now had his true antagonist, not just a negligent heir, but an active saboteur. He needed proof, and it had to be ironclad. He devised a high-risk gambit. Using his now-sanctioned cybersecurity role, he created a honeypot, a fake server labeled Textile Div, long-term strategy. On it, he placed fabricated documents suggesting the textile division had discovered a revolutionary, patentable fabric process that would triple its value in 5 years. It was bait. He then let slip the server's existence to a mid-level manager known to be a gossip. The trap was set. If Tripp was working with the hedge fund, this false information would be a grenade in their plans. They would need to access it to verify this threat to their liquidation strategy. All Matteo had to do was wait and watch the digital logs. The wait lasted 36 agonizing hours. Then, an alert pinged on his secure laptop. The honeypot was accessed, not from within the building, but from an IP address registered to a commercial virtual private network hub in Zurich. The access signature, however, had a tiny, unique flaw, a legacy protocol from Thornton Global's old internal system. The hacker was good, but they had gotten sloppy. They had used a tool built from stolen Thornton code. The connection between the external hedge fund and someone inside the company was now a digital fact. Matteo had his evidence, but evidence presented too soon is just a rumor. He needed the conspiracy to reach its climax, to make its move. He instructed his legal ally to begin drafting a whistleblower complaint to the Securities and Exchange Commission, but to hold it. He urged his journalist contact to start piecing together the story, but not to publish. The pension fund analyst began quietly sounding alarm bells with other major shareholders. The pressure around Tripp was mounting from invisible sources. Paranoia began to consume him. He started firing longtime aides, accusing them of disloyalty. The corporate culture curdled into a witch hunt. It was in this atmosphere of fear that Tripp made his decisive and ultimately foolish move. He summoned Matteo to the executive penthouse. It was not for a congratulatory meeting. Tripp, eyes bloodshot, stood before the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city he was about to betray. He offered Matteo a deal. "You're smart. You see the writing on the wall," Tripp said. "I'm forming a new venture after the transition. I want you on my team. Help me manage the orderly wind-down of the old assets. In return, you'll get equity in the new entity, a fresh start away from this sinking ship." It was a test of loyalty and a bribe. Matteo knew saying no would mark him as an enemy. Saying yes would make him an accomplice. He asked for 48 hours to consider. Tripp agreed, a smug confidence returning to his face. He believed he had just bought the brightest tool in his shed. Matteo left the penthouse and went straight to the one place Tripp would never think to look, the basement laundry of his own estate. He found his mother ironing a tablecloth, the steam rising around her like a veil. He told her everything, the hedge fund, the honeypot, the bribe. Sophia listened, her hands moving with their usual rhythmic certainty. When he finished, she turned off the iron with a soft click. She looked at her son, not with a mother's worry, but with a general's clarity. "He has just shown you his final card," she said, her voice quiet in the hum of the drying vents. "Now you must show him yours, but remember, the suit does not make the man, the press does." She handed him a perfectly ironed handkerchief, a meaningless gesture to any observer. To Matteo, it was an order. The phase of secret preparation was over. It was time to unveil the shadow campaign and force a public confrontation. The battle for Thornton Global would no longer be fought in spreadsheets and server logs. It would be fought in the headlines, in the boardroom, and in the court of public opinion. And Matteo Mendez, the son of the washerwoman, was about to step into the light. Matteo's 48 hours of consideration were a blur of coordinated strikes. He began with a single, anonymous data packet delivered to his journalist contact. It contained the timeline, the cancelled shipping contract, the suspicious debt purchases by the Cayman Islands shell company, and the digital breadcrumb linking that shell to the hack of Thornton's internal server. The story broke at 5 a.m. on a Tuesday, the headline a controlled detonation. Hostile Horizon, is Thornton Global being engineered for a fall? It stopped short of naming Tripp as the architect, but the questions were precise, surgical, and devastating. The stock market opened to a selling frenzy. The board of directors, blindsided and furious, demanded an emergency meeting. Tripp's reaction was not panic, but rage. He knew the leak had to be internal, and his suspicion, fueled by paranoia, fell on a veteran board member who had opposed his going private plan. He fired the man in a public, humiliating conference call, but the real counterattack was more insidious. Tripp's private investigator, the same one used for the audit, was given a new directive: dig into the background of every employee who had accessed the textile division servers in the last 6 months. Matteo's name was on that list. The investigator started with the obvious: academic records, financials, residential history. It was clean, almost too clean, a story of admirable, hard-won success. Then he looked deeper, at utility bills from a decade prior, at old addresses. He traced Matteo back to a modest apartment building, and there, cross-referencing with city employment records, he found a match he almost dismissed as coincidence. A Sofia Mendez, domestic worker, listed at that same address as a next of kin on an old school form. His curiosity piqued. He ran her employment history. The result made him sit back in his chair. Sofia Mendez was a current employee of the Thornton estate. He had just connected the brilliant young analyst to a household laundress. Tripp received this information not as a threat, but as a weapon. He didn't see a strategic mind forged by sacrifice. He saw a vulnerability, an embarrassment he could exploit. He summoned Matteo to the penthouse again, but this time the atmosphere was gloating, not conspiratorial. "I did some digging on you, Matteo," Tripp said, leaning against his desk. "Quite the up-by-the-bootstraps story. Winchester University, impressive. I even found your mother. Sophia Wright works in my own home." "A washerwoman," he let the word hang, dripping with contempt. "Tell me, did she polish the silver to pay for your textbooks?" He expected shame, stammering submission. He saw none. Matteo's face remained impassive, a calm that unnerved Tripp more than any outburst. "Her work is honest," Matteo replied simply. Tripp smirked, believing he had won. "Here's my new offer. You publicly recant. You tell the press your data was misinterpreted, a young analyst's mistake. You help me calm the shareholders. In return, I don't have your mother fired for, let's say, fraternization with a corporate employee. She keeps her job, you keep yours. We forget this ever happened." It was a brutal, personal ultimatum: betray the truth or destroy his mother's livelihood. Matteo left without giving an answer. He went to his mother, this time in her small apartment. He told her of Tripp's threat. Sophia listened, her hands folding a towel with methodical calm. When he finished, she put the towel down. "He thinks my job is a leash to pull you," she said. "He does not understand it is a flag I have already planted. You will not recant." The next morning, Sofia Mendez did not report for work at the Thornton estate. Instead, she walked into the offices of the same newspaper that broke the initial story. She brought her own evidence: decades of pay stubs, her secret savings ledger, and a notarized affidavit. She sat for an interview, her voice steady, her eyes clear. The resulting article was not a business story. It was a human detonation. The headline read, "The Iron Price, a mother's 20-year secret fund to battle a billionaire." It laid bare the entire calculus: the wages from the Thornton home financing the education now being used to save the Thornton company from its own heir. The narrative flipped completely. Matteo was no longer just a whistleblowing analyst. He was the embodiment of a generational reckoning. Sophia was no longer a hidden servant. She was a figure of profound dignity and strategic patience. Public sympathy and investor fury ignited. The board meeting, now a media circus, became the crucible. Tripp, desperate, played his final card. He presented the board with a firm offer from the Cayman Island hedge fund, Apex Holdings, to buy the textile division at a fire sale price, arguing it was the only way to raise cash and save the rest of the company. He framed it as a painful but necessary amputation. What he didn't know was that Matteo, through his pension fund ally, had already contacted Apex's largest institutional investor. Matteo presented them with a different story: evidence that Tripp was colluding with a rogue Apex fund manager to artificially depress the asset's value before the buyout, a scheme that would lead to lawsuits and regulatory hell for the entire hedge fund. Facing this liability, Apex's head office abruptly withdrew their offer, publicly citing unforeseen compliance issues. Tripp was left at the boardroom table, holding a worthless piece of paper, his escape hatch welded shut. In the stunned silence that followed, Matteo spoke. He did not speak as an employee, but as a shareholder, having used his and his mother's life savings to quietly acquire a small but symbolic stake in the company. He presented a one-page alternative, not a takeover, a rescue, a partnership between existing management and a consortium of pension funds he had helped assemble, focused on modernizing the textile division, saving its thousands of jobs, and rebuilding value. It was the antithesis of Tripp liquidation plan. The board, shell-shocked and out of options, voted. Tripp Thornton was removed as CEO. The board, seeking stability and a clean break from the scandal, offered the interim leadership of the strategic review to the one person who seemed to understand both the company's value and its peril, Mateo Mendez. Mateo stood in the empty boardroom after the vote, the weight of the title interim director settling on him. He had won the battle. He had secured the company's future and his mother's vindication. But as he looked out at the city, a call came in from his legal ally. Her voice was tense. "We just got a tip from a clerk at the county courthouse. Tripp didn't just flee the boardroom. He filed a lawsuit an hour ago. He's not suing the company. He's suing you and your mother personally. He's alleging corporate espionage, theft of intellectual property, and a conspiracy of fraud stemming from your mother's employment. He's claiming every dollar she saved was gained under false pretenses, that she stole household funds to finance your education. It was a grotesque, malicious legal fiction, but it was a weapon. It meant depositions, asset freezes, a brutal invasion of their private lives. The public war was over. But Tripp Thornton, exiled and humiliated, had just opened a far darker, more personal front. The victory in the boardroom was real, but the cost was about to be counted not in shares, but in scars. And the first subpoena would be delivered to Sofia Mendez's door by the end of the day. The lawsuit was a masterpiece of spite, designed not to win, but to exhaust. Tripp's allegations were a web of half-truths and malicious speculation, but they triggered an automatic freeze on the Mendez family's assets, including the secret savings account and Mateo's newly acquired company shares. The legal bills began accumulating at a rate that would have crippled them months before. But Mateo was no longer a lone analyst, and Sofia was no longer an invisible worker. Their story had become a cause. The pension fund consortium, seeing Tripp's lawsuit as a vindictive attack on the stability they were trying to build, agreed to cover the legal defense. A pro bono team from a top civil rights firm, moved by Sofia's narrative, took the case. The battle moved from the boardroom and the headlines to the sterile confines of a federal courthouse. The discovery process was a brutal invasion. Tripp's lawyers demanded every financial record, every email, every personal communication between mother and son for the past 20 years. They subpoenaed Sofia's former neighbors, Mateo's old teachers, trying to find any crack in the story of sacrifice. What they found instead was a consistent, undeniable pattern of diligence. Sofia's ledger, entered into evidence, was a devastatingly simple document. 2 columns, income from her lawful wages and outgoing transfers to educational institutions. There was no missing silver, no phantom household funds. The defense turned the scrutiny back on Tripp. They subpoenaed his financial records, the communications with the Apex Holdings fund manager, the records of the shell company. The judge, growing impatient with the plaintiff's thin case, allowed it. The deposition of Sofia Mendez was the turning point. Tripp's lead attorney, a condescending man with an expensive suit, aimed to portray her as a confused, greedy employee. He asked about her duties, her hours, her son's ambitions. He then asked the question he thought would trap her. "Mrs. Mendez, is it not true that you encouraged your son to target Thornton Global out of a sense of entitlement, a belief that you were owed more than your wages?" Sofia, who had been speaking softly but clearly, looked directly at the lawyer, then at the court reporter, and finally at Tripp, who was observing via video link. Her voice did not rise, but it filled the room. "I encouraged my son to learn. The wages I earned paid for that learning. What he chose to do with that knowledge, to save a company from a thief, was his choice. You confuse entitlement with justice. I have never taken what was not mine." The question for this room is, can the same be said for your client? There was a long silence. The attorney had no follow-up. The video feed of Tripp's face went dark. A week later, the hedge fund manager from Apex Holdings, facing his own regulatory investigation, cut a deal. He provided the Securities and Exchange Commission with a full account of his arrangement with Tripp Thornton, the plan to depress the stock, the illegal access to the servers, the promised kickback from the fire sale of the textile division. Tripp was now facing a criminal probe for securities fraud and conspiracy. His civil lawsuit instantly collapsed. The judge dismissed it with prejudice, condemning it as a frivolous and bad faith attempt to weaponize the judicial system. The asset freeze was lifted. Matteo and Sophia were not just vindicated, they were awarded legal fees. Tripp Thornton, stripped of his remaining shares to pay his own mounting legal debts, was left bankrupt and facing indictment. The Thornton era was definitively over. With the legal poison cleared, the board of Thornton Global moved swiftly. The interim leadership had steadied the company. Matteo's plan for the textile division, backed by the pension fund consortium, was already showing early signs of working, restoring creditor confidence. The board, desperate for legitimacy and a clean break from the past, offered Matteo Mendez the permanent position of chief executive officer. The vote was unanimous. The press release went out on a bright Monday morning. The photograph showed Matteo in a simple suit, standing before the company logo. There was no triumphant smirk, only a look of focused gravity. The headline read, "From basement to boardroom, Thornton Global names new CEO." The final, surprising detail emerged during the transfer of control. In the corporate archives, amid the deeds and old stock certificates, a junior lawyer found a yellowed, handwritten addendum to the original Thornton Family Trust. It had been drafted by Charles Thornton I, the founder, a self-made man. It stated that should the family line ever fail in its fiduciary duty to the company and its workers, a special voting share, held in reserve, would be released to a committee of the company's longest-serving employees, giving them a decisive say in choosing new leadership. The clause had been forgotten, buried by generations of heirs. Sophia Mendez, with 22 years of service, was the longest-serving employee of Thornton Global in any capacity. The lawyer brought the document to Matteo. He did not use it to claim power. Instead, he had it framed and placed on the wall of the new, modest CEO's office, a silent reminder that true legacy is not born from blood, but from fidelity. On his first day as permanent CEO, Matteo arrived early. He did not go straight to the executive suite. He went down to the building's basement, to the maintenance and laundry department. He asked the manager, a confused but respectful man, for a favor. An hour later, Sophia Mendez was escorted not to the servants' entrance of the estate, but to the lobby of the Thornton Global Tower. She wore a simple, elegant dress she had made herself. Matteo met her there, took her hand, and led her to the private elevator. They rose to the top floor, to the corner office that had once been Tripp Thornton's domain. The walls, once adorned with trophies, were now bare. The only items on the desk were a computer, the framed trust addendum, and a single, old, carefully ironed handkerchief. Sophia walked to the window, looking out at the city that had been a landscape of struggle for so long. She did not cry. She placed a hand on the glass, then turned to her son. "The view is the same," she said, "but the air is different." Matteo nodded. "It's ours to breathe now." He guided her to the CEO's chair. She hesitated for only a moment before sitting down, her posture as straight and dignified as it had been at her ironing board. A photographer, prearranged, captured the image. The washerwoman, seated in the heart of the empire built on the fabric she once tended. The picture did not run in the business section. It ran everywhere. It became an icon not of revenge, but of reclamation. The narrative arc was complete. The silent investment had yielded the ultimate return. Sophia did not keep the chair. She returned to her apartment, to a life of chosen simplicity, her work finally done. But once a month, she would have lunch with her son in his office, where they would discuss not business, but books and family and the future. The company, under Matteo's leadership, stabilized, then grew, by returning to the principle its founder had espoused and its last heir had betrayed. That value is built by the hands that do the work, and true strength is found not in what you take, but in what you build to last. The long, silent calculation was over. The result was more than an acquisition. It was a restoration. The story of Sophia and Matteo Mendez is often told as a perfect revenge fantasy, the ultimate underdog victory. But to see it only as such is to miss its profound, quiet truth. This was not a sudden revolt, but a patient redirection of energy. For 20 years, the Thornton family saw only the steam from Sophia's iron, not the fire in her mind. They paid for a service and accidentally funded their own reckoning. The real weapon was never malice, but mathematics, the cold, patient math of compound interest on sacrifice, of deferred gratification accumulating into unstoppable momentum. In a world obsessed with overnight success and viral fame, their story reminds us of a different currency: time. Time invested not in fleeting trends, but in the slow, sure work of building a human being. Sophia's ledger was not just a financial document, it was a moral one. Each entry was a choice to value a future she would not inhabit over comfort she could have had. This is the hidden engine of true social mobility, the invisible labor that never appears on a balance sheet, but ultimately determines its totals. It asks an uncomfortable question: how many other empires are being quietly, unknowingly financed by the suppressed dreams of those who maintain them? Matteo's ultimate victory was not in occupying the corner office, but in redefining its purpose. He did not become a new Thornton, he became the antithesis of one. His leadership was forged in the understanding of real value, not the speculative value of stock tickers, but the intrinsic value of the work, the workers, and the wisdom bought by his mother's endurance. The framed trust addendum on his wall was more than a historical curiosity, it was a compass. It pointed to a foundational principle that greed had obscured: that authority is a loan from the collective effort, not a birthright. We often mistake power for noise, for spectacle, for the dramatic takeover. Yet this saga teaches that the most formidable power is often the most silent. It is the power of a mother's resolve, etched in steam on a basement window. It is the power of knowledge, carefully acquired and strategically applied. It is the power of a story that resonates because it is not about exceptional luck, but about universal truths, about sacrifice, patience, and the unbreakable thread of love that can weave a new destiny from the frayed fabric of an old order. Sophia Mendes returned to a quiet life, her hands finally at rest. But her legacy was no longer confined to a single grateful son. It became a blueprint, a proof of concept whispered in households where dreams are pressed between the pages of survival. It proves that no position is so low that it cannot be a foundation, and no gate is so high that it cannot be unlocked by the right key, forged over time in the hidden fires of determination. If this story of quiet power and generational triumph resonated with you, share it with someone who needs a reminder that the greatest investments are often the most patient ones. For more documentaries that explore the hidden architectures of our world, subscribe and tap the bell to join our community. Until next time, remember, the most world-changing plans are not drafted in boardrooms. They are first drawn on the heart and paid for in installments of sweat, hope, and time.